The Great Lakes are well known for their harsh November gales that rage over the lakes during the autumn months. Some of the earliest shipwrecks on the lakes date back as far as the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and continues to this day, with the three largest shipwrecks on the Great Lakes being the SS Daniel J. Morrell, which was lost on Lake Huron on November 29, 1966, the SS Carl D. Bradley, which was lost on Lake Michigan on November 18, 1958, and of course, the largest shipwreck on the Great Lakes, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, lost on Lake Superior on November 10, 1975. There was only one survivor from the Morrell, only two survivors from the Bradley, no survivors from the Fitzgerald. But even decades before these three ships met their end, a massive storm raged over 4 of the 5 Great Lakes and sank 12 ships, most of which went to the bottom with no survivors. The Great Lakes are 5 massive bodies of fresh water, with the 5 lakes being Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. I actually live very close to the shore of Lake Ontario in upstate New York, with the largest and deepest lake being Lake Superior, the smallest being Lake Ontario, the shallowest being Lake Erie, and Lake Huron being the one with the longest coastline. The lakes are bordered by the province of Ontario, Canada, as well as the U.S. states of New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. With the lakes created thousands of years ago after melting glaciers during the last ice age, each of the 5 lakes are large and deep enough to be home to sea life, and for centuries they have played a huge role in trade and transportation across the US and Canada. Surprisingly, all of the lakes are connected to each other. For example, Lake Superior and Lake Huron are connected by the St. Mary's River, Lake Huron and Lake Michigan are connected by the Straits of Mackinac, Lake Huron and Lake Erie are connected by the St. Clair and Detroit rivers, which join together at Lake St. Clair, and finally, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario are connected by the Niagara River, which is home to the famous Niagara Falls. However, due to the falls, ships can't traverse the Niagara River. Instead, they use the Welland Canal. Plus, the lakes are connected to the Atlantic by the St. Lawrence River. But due to the fact that most lake freighters were too big to fit through the locks of the St. Lawrence Seaway, most of the freighters were confined to the Great Lakes area. The average size of lake freighters at the turn of the 20th century was anywhere between 400 to 500 feet, or 121 to 152 meters. While the largest ones were over 600 feet long. The title Queen of the Lakes goes to the longest ship operating on the Great Lakes. Lake ferries actually weren't the only ships that operate on the lakes. There were also car ferries and passenger ships that operate on the Great Lakes. The most common cargo that lake ferries carried was iron ore. Typically, these freighters carried the iron ore from the mines in the northern part of the Great Lakes to the mills in the southern part of the lakes, where the iron ore is then turned into iron and steel. Iron ore wasn't the only cargo that lake ferries carry, however. Lake ferries also transport cargo such as coal, taconite, and potash. And in order to make the maximum profit, most lake ferries were underpowered, and were usually only equipped with a single 1,000 to 1,100 horsepower triple expansion engine, which isn't a huge number when compared to similarly sized cargo ships built at the time for the open ocean. These ships were equipped with engines like this because they were cheaper to build and were more fuel efficient. Also, the captains on the Great Lakes were under immense pressure to transport as much cargo as possible as late into the year as they possibly could before the lakes froze over in the winter months. Due to this, shipwrecks have basically become a common thing on the Great Lakes, not only due to the gales that rage over the lakes in the fall and winter, but also because there are a lot of hazards such as shoals and reefs that can be very dangerous to ships. Because of this, there are hundreds of lighthouses, lightships, and large buoys on the Great Lakes that could also aid in ships in storms, but they would make no difference in the storm of 1913. The SS H.B. Hawgood was a large steel-hulled freighter that, although she wasn't the largest on the lakes at the time, she was a decent-sized freighter that came in at 434 feet, or 132 meters long, and had a beam of 50 feet. She was constructed in 1903 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio. She was launched in 1903 and was put into service later that year. On Sunday, November 9, 1913, the Hawgood, under the command of Captain A.C. May, was sailing north up Lake Huron when Captain May realized that the storm, which had been raging over Lake Superior and Lake Michigan since Friday the 7th, was starting to grow worse, and he decided to turn south to seek refuge in the safety of the St. Clair River to keep his crew and his vessel safe. Captain May realized that a new storm front was moving east towards southern Lake Huron, meaning that the ships that turned south were now heading straight into danger. As night fell, the Hawgood was basically sailing blind. while Captain May was making his search for the St. Clair River. He was concerned that they were very close to land. He shouted to the wheelsman to turn the ship back toward the open lake to keep the ship from running aground. But the wheelsman knew that if they turned back toward the open lake, their ship would capsize in the massive waves. So he defied Captain May's orders and let the Hawgood run aground at the beach at Port Huron, only 100 feet or 30 meters from the Lake Huron Hotel. On the morning of the 10th, it was discovered that the Hawgood would have sunk if she didn't beach. But that was not the only ship that grounded in order to survive. The SS Howard M. Hanna Jr. was a 500-foot, 150-meter-long, 5,905 gross registered ton freighter owned by the Hanna Transit Company. Just like the Hawgood, she was built by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorraine. She was launched on April 28, 1908, and entered service later that year. On November 8th, the Hanna, under the command of Captain William Hagen, left Lorraine bound for Fort William with a load of coal. In the early morning hours of November 9th, as the Hawgood was entering Lake Huron, it was clear that the storm was heading towards them, and when the storm reached them, Captain Hagen couldn't even see the other end of his ship. Then, his crew spotted a light off the ship's side. The light was the Port Austin lighthouse, only about 1,500 feet away from the Hanna. With only seconds to react, Captain Hagen dropped the ship's anchors, but it wasn't enough. The ship grounded only 500 feet from the lighthouse. In the brutal weather, the waves and winds caused her hull to crack, which flayed some of the ship's holds. Even the funnel was torn off. The crew waited out the storm, but when the storm cleared, despite the fact that she was heavily damaged, the ship survived and was later repaired and put back into service until she was scrapped in 1983. The two ships were heavily damaged in the storm, but they were both repaired and returned to service, and all of their crews survived the ordeal. The storm of 1913 claimed 12 ships as its victims and stranded 19 ships, including the Hanna and the Hawgood. They were the lucky ones to survive the deadliest storm in the history of the Great Lakes. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any new videos on this channel that I upload every other week. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.